We will invest more than $18 billion to further narrow gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples.
Tonight, the Liberals table their first budget in 2 years, but will it be enough to stave off an election?
Still kind of hard to kind of realize that I did have my own house here, and now there's nothing left of it, pretty much.
Up in smoke, that spring grass fire that destroyed a church and home on the Blood Reserve has members vowing to rebuild.
APTN does not speak on behalf of Treaty 8, and I believe that they are not in tune or in touch with a lot of our grassroots people.
And the United Nations Declaration is being touted as the greatest thing since sliced bannock, but not everyone agrees. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Melissa Ridgen. It's been 2 years since the last federal budget, and today Canada released its economic plan for the future, emphasizing a recovery from the COVID pandemic. This year's budget continued a trend of billions being spent on Indigenous communities. Jamie Pashagumscom has the highlights.
Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland presented the new budget in Parliament, in which she said Canada has made progress in its relationship with Indigenous people, but they have a lot of work ahead.
We will invest more than $18 billion to further narrow gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, to support healthy, safe, and prosperous Indigenous communities, and to advance reconciliation with First Nations, Inuit, and the Métis Nation. We will invest more than $6 billion for infrastructure in Indigenous communities and $2.2 billion to help end the national tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
That $2.2 billion is over 5 years and includes $861 million over 5 years for culturally responsive policing in Indigenous communities. Of that, $540.3 million goes to support First Nations policing and $108.6 million to renovate policing facilities in First Nation and Inuit communities. Also under its response to missing and murdered Indigenous women is $275 million over 5 years to strengthen Indigenous languages, $126 million over 3 years to foster health systems free from racism and discrimination, and nearly $109 million over 2 years to reestablish and revitalize Indigenous cultural spaces. The $6 billion for infrastructure will be provided over the next 5 years, including housing and clean drinking water, with $4.3 billion over 4 years to support shovel-ready projects like roads, education, and healthcare facilities. $1.7 billion over 5 years to cover operations and maintenance costs of infrastructure, with $389 million in ongoing funding. The government also pledges $1 billion over 5 years to support First Nations child and family services. That $1 billion promises to keep First Nations children and families together, continue to implement the orders from the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, and permanently ensure First Nations youth who have aged out of care continue to receive supports for up to 2 years. To provide better education, there is an investment of $1.2 billion over 5 years and nearly $182 million going forward, including $726 million over 5 years and nearly $182 million ongoing to ensure predictable funding for First Nations schools, and $350 million over 5 years to expand access for adult education on reserve. On top of all that, there is $150 million over 2 years for Inuit and Métis post-secondary. Freeland's budget also promises to continue supporting Indigenous communities in their fight against COVID. The government will provide an additional $1.2 billion. Part of that will go to hiring nurses, helping at-risk people isolate, and in the distribution of PPEs. Jamie Pashagumscom, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Thanks, Jamie. Opposition parties were quick to give their 2 cents on the budget, and the minority Liberals will need opposition support to pass it and avoid a spring election. Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole wouldn't tip his hat over whether or not he'll support Chrystia Freeland's budget, while NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was more clear.
And knowing how hard the third wave is hitting, recently Canadians were asked the question what they think about an election, and they said, not surprising, that it would be unjust to Canadians and it would be unsafe for Canadians to have an election. And I absolutely agree. So we are not going to make an irresponsible decision to any way jeopardize the safety and security of Canadians.
We will be talking as a caucus about this budget this week. We will be proposing amendments. There's really no plan to get the finances of the nation under control. Mr. Trudeau, who already accumulated $100 billion worth of debt before the pandemic, is now tacking on another $500 billion and no plan to secure jobs for Canadians in all parts of the country.
We want to hear what you think about the federal budget, what's in it that you like, what's missing, and what don't you like. You can share your thoughts with us. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. You can leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and now TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Canada's Bill C51 is progressing through Parliament. The bill will enact legislation on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but leaders in Alberta say they don't support the bill and don't want the AFN representing them on the issue. APTN's Chris Stewart explains.
Bill C-15 will enable Canada to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That declaration covers issues like self-determination, self-government, language, and more. In December, the bill passed the first reading in Parliament, and it has the support of the AFN and National Chief Perry Bellegarde. But leaders in Treaties 6, 7, and 8 are calling the bill flawed. Treaty 8 Grand Chief Arthur Noski says the AFN should not be negotiating the bill with Canada. He says Canada should be consulting and negotiating on a nation-to-nation basis.
AFN does not speak on behalf of Treaty 8, and I believe that they are not in tune or in touch with a lot of our grassroots people in understanding the sovereign relationship that we have. Because if they did, if they knew that these treaties were sovereign to sovereign agreements, why would they be there trying to speak on behalf of them?
AFN National Chief Bellegarde's office told APTN he was too busy to comment. AFN Alberta Regional Chief Marlene Portra did agree with Grand Chief Noski in saying the AFN shouldn't be negotiating the bill.
I agree with that. I mean, the AFN is a lobby group, and we're there to facilitate the direction that's provided by the chiefs in assembly, and and that's our role. It's not to negotiate and make decisions on behalf of First Nations. It's the nations that do that, and not the Assembly of First Nations as an organization.
Noski says he is concerned that the bill could hurt more than help.
This is 121 years in the making, and the question that we have is this again another suppressive legislation that is going to be interpreted by one side to be able to, again, restrict and suppress. So that is the issue that the First Nations have and are concerned about.
Chief Portra says there needs to be more talks.
They need to put aside adequate time to consult with the First Nations and to get that feedback and that direction directly from them. And in this case, like I know in Alberta, they had 2 sessions.
The Office of the Minister of Justice and Attorney General sent a statement to APTN, which read in part, "We have always said that engagements would continue throughout the parliamentary process. Parliamentarians have the opportunity at several stages to examine the bill in depth, hear from Indigenous partners, and consider any amendments that are brought forward for inclusion. We are open to any proposed improvements to Bill C-15. Grand Chief Noski says the bill isn't necessary at all.
I don't think you require legislation. I think the crucial piece that's missing here is from the treaty partners under the sovereignty agreement to create their own laws, to create their own legislation, and how they go forward.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Nunavut is reporting 6 new cases of COVID-19 today, all of them in Iqaluit, which declared an outbreak on Friday. The territory's top doctor says so far the new cases have all been successfully contact traced.
Inside Iqaluit, we know the links for each and every case that we found so far. So the next little while will be, critical to staying on top of that and keeping everyone in isolation and hopefully stopping transmission as soon as possible.
There are currently 28 active cases of the virus in Nunavut. Well, it's time for us to take a commercial break, but when we come back, rebuilding after a devastating early spring grass fire in Blood territory.
Still kind of hard to kind of realize that I did have my own house here, and now there's nothing left of it, pretty much.
Welcome back. Emotions are running high in Minneapolis, where closing arguments were heard in the Derek Chauvin trial, and the matter is now in the hands of a jury. The prosecution has argued that Chauvin used excessive force when he pressed his knee into George Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes, resulting in the man's death. The defense counters that Floyd's health and drug use actually caused the death. Chauvin has pleaded not guilty to second and third degree murder and manslaughter in Floyd's death. The prosecution was blunt in its assessment of Chauvin's actions.
This use of force was unreasonable. It was excessive. It was grossly disproportionate. It is not an excuse for the shocking abuse that you saw with your own eyes. And you can believe your own eyes. This wasn't policing. This was murder. The defendant is guilty of all 3 counts. All of them. And there's no excuse.
Members of an Alberta First Nation are still feeling the effects of a massive grass fire that burned through parts of the community back in March. After losing a church and a home, some members are planning to rebuild. Tamara Pimentel visited the community and has this story.
It was a lot of work, lots of money that was spent into it. It was a bit of a loss.
This is where Jacob Spear Chief's tiny home once stood. He spent over 2 years renovating it and was supposed to move into it this month.
Still kind of hard to kind of realize that I did have my own house here, and now there's nothing left of it, pretty much.
Right next to it was a church. The two weren't band funded, but built by his grandfather. In March, this secluded area on the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta was in flames. A grass fire caused by a sweat lodge and swept by high winds tore through 15,000 acres of land. Jacob's mother, Sharon Spear Chief, says her father is a pastor and created this space for community gatherings. We were unable to interview him due to COVID-19.
We had birthday parties here. He would put up golf tournaments as well. It was important, I think, for a gathering place for people.
15 households had to evacuate in March. Power that was lost is now restored, but the land and belongings surrounding these homes are left damaged. Only Jacob's home and the church were burned down. Chief and Council could not provide an interview, but a representative of Blood Tribe leadership told APTN they are communicating with families on plans to move forward. Teddy Crosschild, who also grew up in this area, says the community here is still dealing with disposing of burnt rubble.
There's all these other issues they have to deal with. It's not just the fire, they're back home. There's still, the other stuff. And then this soot that's, when it's windy, it's going to still keep blowing into their homes.
Jacob says he'll begin planning to rebuild his tiny home, but says nothing can replace the structures that held so many memories with his grandfather.
See, this was not just the church, but a community center for everyone to gather. My home next door, and not only just the loss of those buildings, but his shop as well. That's where I learned a lot of my mechanics. That's where I learned, my carpentry skills was from my grandpa. He taught us how to be self-sufficient in his shop. And losing it is losing a lot of memories, so.
Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News on the Blood Reserve.
To northern BC now, the airport in Dease Lake is set to receive a major upgrade. While it's being lauded by mineral exploration companies, it's also expected to improve medical outcomes for those living in the area. The BC government has announced $9 million for the project. The regional district and businesses will give an additional $2 million. The upgrades will allow for more commercial flights to the mineral-rich region, also known as the Golden Triangle. But the Tahltan Nation says the upgrades will also mean better emergency health access.
This will afford, I believe, 24-hour medevac operations as required. In the past, during poor weather conditions, we were looking at an ambulance to get people out. This will speed up the response time immensely. So it's a huge benefit to the community and to the nation as a whole.
Still in northern BC, a former residential school building there is set to be demolished and replaced with a cultural centre. The building operated as a residential school from 1951 to 1975 in the Cascadena community of Lower Post on the BC-Yukon border. Until last year, it acted as a post office and an office space, but is a source of trauma for many survivors and their families. Federal government pledged $11.5 million for the new multi-purpose cultural building, which will include recreational, educational, and cultural spaces.
The new building, it's going to be a new start. We've been making things work with having to work out of that building for many years, but I think it's going to be finally a turning point for our government to make some big changes, to start moving forward in a positive way.
Construction of the building is slated to start in June, and it's expected to be completed next year. Well, it's time for us to take another break, but coming up, virtual cooking classes.
So what we're doing today is we're cooking some bison tomahawks and some early spring vegetables, and we're using fire as a means to carry that out.
Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Our viewer William Fowler sent us this majestic shot of Mount Kerskelen in Jasper National Park. It's near Athabasca Falls. That's, of course, in Alberta. You can keep those photos coming for the chance to be featured as our next photo of the day. Submit your photo to share@aptn.ca, and don't forget to include all the details about where it was taken and who's in it. Let's take a look now at tomorrow's weather forecast. Off to the east coast, we got 18 and some showers for Fredericton, Charlottetown sunshine, 9 degrees. Kuujjuaq sunny and 5, Nain, some snow expected, 1 degree there. Saguenay 11 and cloud, Settile sunshine, 7 degrees. North Bay 1 and snow expected, 5 with a chance of flurries in Sault Ste. Marie. So Lookout -1 and a chance of flurries, same with Big Trout Lake, but -8 there. Sunshine and 6 degrees for the Paw Puckatawagan, sunny, -3 degrees. 0 for Barons River and Princess Harbour, but only Princess Harbour gets some sunshine. 1 and sunny for Swift Current, 2 and sunny for Saskatoon. 9 and sunshine for Meadow Lake, 9 and cloud for Stony Rapids. 7 for Fort Chip and Fort McMurray, sunshine there. Sunny in the southern part of the province too, 9 in Edmonton, 10s for Medicine Hat and Lethbridge. 18 in sunshine for Vancouver. Kamloops, 22 and sunny. Sandspit, mix of sun and cloud, and 12 degrees for Nelson, sunshine and 16. Beaver Creek, cloud, 9 degrees, sunshine and 8 for Whitehorse. Snow and 0 degrees for Norman Wells, 9 in Fort Simpson and sunny. Fort McPherson, snow and 7 degrees. Paulatuck, snow and 5. Snow's carrying on to Nunavut 2, -14 in Nuyat, -6 in Whale Cove. Sunshine for Talioke, -8 degrees, -8, but snow for Joe Haven, -11 in Clyde River and sunshine. United We Curl is a new curling initiative by one of the sport's biggest suppliers, Goldline Curling, and they hope the initiative promotes more diversity in the sport. 3 curling brooms have been designed by Black and Indigenous curlers in Canada and the United States. Proceeds of the broom sales will go towards BIPOC inclusion and curling initiatives in the designers' communities. One of the designers is Graydon Yee Lucen. He's from Kashkatau First Nation number 72, that's in Saskatchewan. He says that being able to showcase First Nations curling culture, or First Nations culture in curling, was something that he couldn't pass up. I have to say,
I'm just happy that I have a chance to show off artwork from my culture, because I'm not sure that if anyone knows, about First Nations people and that and their artwork, and just want to really make it aware that Indigenous people play as well, and we're involved in this sport and we love it.
To Ontario, where our community wellness program is hosting a series of virtual events. They focus on either the mind, the body, or the spirits, as Ontario faces stricter lockdown measures. And the latest is focused on food. Here's Annette Francis with that story from Six Nations.
The vegetables are ready, the meat is prepared, and the fire is perfect. Now it's time to start cooking.
So what we're doing today is we're cooking some bison tomahawks and some early spring vegetables, and we're using fire as a means to carry that out and have some fun and promote a message. Using food as medicine or as a vehicle.
The message being shared by Six Nations celebrity chef Rich Francis is how to prepare healthy traditional foods. Francis is a special guest for the 5th virtual community wellness series. The sessions began because of the pandemic. This one is dubbed Food for Medicine.
Everything that we're using today is kind of from this, what's happening today, like asparagus. We didn't have the time, but I wanted to find some fiddleheads, some ramps, and ultimately cooking for the seasons and whatever that means, And I think when we stay into the integrity of using seasonal ingredients, we can just ultimately get more connected that way to our food sources and what we're eating.
Francis's 2 sons joined in on the cookout. Holden is also a chef. He has been sharing Indigenous cuisine alongside his dad for the past 3 years. He says it's been a great opportunity during the pandemic.
It's really important to know for the community. Being able to grow your own food and knowing exactly where food comes from is a huge part for yourself and very important to know. Just to take care of yourself and not ordering out every night, or just having someone else make your food for you and not knowing exactly what's going in it.
Braden's going to put it on here.
12-year-old Braden took over the reins too. He was happy with the results.
It was amazing. The colors and flavors are all over the place.
Chef Francis encourages families to get outside to cook and enjoy the foods that Mother Nature has to offer. The next community wellness event will be held in 2 weeks. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Six Nations.
Feeling a lot less excited about the bologna that's waiting for me at home for dinner. We are all out of time for your news tonight. Thanks, of course, for tuning in. I'm Melissa Ridgen. You have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.